This is our opening reading. It's a poem simply called Hope. The poet is named Liesl Müller. I've read this before, but today felt like a good time to return to it. Hope. It hovers in dark corners before the lights are turned on. It shakes sleep from its eyes and drops from mushroom gills. It explodes in the starry heads of dandelions turned sages. It sticks to the wings of green angels that sail from the tops of maples. It sprouts in each occluded eye of the many-eyed potato. It lives in each earthworm segment, surviving cruelty. It is the motion that runs from the eyes to the tail of a dog. It is the mouth that inflates the lungs of the child that has just been born. It is the singular gift we cannot destroy in ourselves, the argument that refutes death, the genius that invents the future, all we know of God. It is the serum which makes us swear not to betray one another. It is in this poem trying to speak. Our Bible reading this morning is from the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. We're now in the season of Advent, looking towards Christmas. Advent doesn't always start with the announcement of a pregnancy, but this time it will. Luke chapter 1, starting at verse 26. 6 months later, this is 6 months after Mary's cousin learned that she was pregnant. 6 months later, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth to a young woman named Mary. She was engaged to a man named Joseph of the house of David. Upon arriving, the angel said to Mary, "Rejoice, highly favored one, God is with you. Blessed are you among women." And Mary said, what now? They say it more poetically. Mary was deeply troubled by these words and wondered what the angel's greeting meant. The angel went on to say to her, "Don't be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and bear a son and give him the name Jesus, which means deliverance. His dignity will be great. He will be called the only begotten of God. God will give Jesus the judgment seat of David, his ancestor, to rule over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign will never end." Mary said to the angel, I'm sure there were a lot of things that Mary said to the angel, but the one that they recorded here is, Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I've never been with a man?" The angel answered her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Hence, the offspring to be born will be called the Holy One of God. Know, too, that Elizabeth, your kinswoman, has conceived a child in her old age. She who was thought to be infertile is now in her 6th month. Nothing is impossible with God." And Mary said, "I'm the servant of God. Let it be done with me as you say." And with that, the angel left her. Do you know what your name means? For some folks, a name indicates a family lineage. Like you're carrying a name of an ancestor who wore it before you did. For some, the meaning of the name is obvious, whether it's intended or not. We all know Joy Berge by her name, right? Joy, you can tell us if name is destiny or if it's a little more complicated than that. Ruth's name comes straight out of the Bible. Mercy, and it means mercy. Priscilla's name comes from a Latin term that means ancient. I'm not throwing shade. I'm older than she is. But it has the implication of being venerable. My parents took a trip to the Holy Land a number of years ago that was led by a retired United Methodist bishop whose last name was Goodpastor. I'm not sure if he had a choice about what he was going to do. My full name means a lot, though my parents chose it for the way that it sounds, the rhythm of it, the way it flows off your tongue, instead of any inherent message that it communicates. My mom is a musician and my dad appreciates music, so I like to think that it's got a certain musicality to it. But I have looked up the meanings. I'm pretty sure I've shared them in a sermon at one time before, but I couldn't find the sermon in my records, so I figured this is fair game to talk about again. So Gregory, my first name, it means watchful. I like that. I pay attention to things. It makes me a good listener and a pretty good gift giver. Kipp means on the hill or from the pointed hill. These are all kind of Celtic, Gaelic, over in that part of the world. Gilmore is a Gaelic term that indicates, in a fitting way for today's Bible reading, devotion to the Virgin Mary. If you write down Gilmore and look at it a little cross-eyed, you can almost make it out as Hail Mary. I kind of get that. So my piety is obvious right from the get-go. If you know what my name means, Gregory Kipp Gilmore, the watchful one on the hill, devoted to the Virgin Mary. But then, so thank you to my parents. Then I got married, and I didn't want Kathy to lose her family identity and mine, and I wanted to. I had taken on something new in marriage, which is why we hyphenated, and no one knows how to pronounce it now. Clough is an old English word for a gorge, a narrow ravine, a valley. And so I have envisioned some time-traveling weirdness of introducing myself to a whole monastery full of ancient Celtic monks and not getting past the name because their jaw drops when I finish my name with a word that means cleavage. So maybe your name isn't always destiny, but think of it as a blessing. When you came into being, when you entered into the beauty and the swirl of heartbreak that is life on this earth, somebody chose a name and spoke it over you. Even if that's not exactly how it happened, and even if you're not so sure that your parents had a grand intention or any grand hopes for you, you still get to make this as a choice. To wear your name, one that was given to you or one that you have chosen, to hold it as a blessing that you are always and ever growing into. As we've done these past several Advents now, we're using materials put together by a group, Sanctified Art. It's their image, their artwork that's on the cover of the bulletin or that was on the opening slide this morning. We're going to follow their theme, at least loosely. We'll get those visuals. We'll get some original song lyrics for our closing hymns. We're going to hear some of their poetry, and we're using the Bible readings that they have put together, which doesn't follow the usual pattern. Maybe some of you will even spend some time each day with the devotional that they put together. We emailed that out this morning as an e-reader version. There are some printed copies somewhere out there, out on the table, if anybody wants one. And we can print more if you need. But the theme that we're following is called Words for the Beginning. The season of Advent is a beginning. As we move through the last month of the calendar year, we're starting off a new season of the church year. The idea of words for the beginning is sort of like making a New Year's resolution, except those can be a little bit janky. And maybe even a little bit weirdly coercive, because New Year's resolutions so often show how well we've internalized the messages about what is supposedly wrong with us. One of the writers for the season, so we're thinking of these words somewhat differently. One of the writers for this series makes the analogy to a practice that she learned in her yoga classes of setting intention, the words that she focuses on at the start of the class or the start of her day. And she says when she first started doing this, her guiding intentions, here, I'm going to read from her. She says they were more like wishes. I want to have ease in my body, or I hope to find peace. I would name my intention through a scarcity-focused negative lens. But my teacher explained the process as naming something as though it's already so. For example, instead I would say, I am at peace, or peace is settling into my body. This linguistic shift is pivotal because the moment I utter those words to myself, the words transform everything. In the Bible reading this morning, the first words we hear of Mary indicate that she's a young woman living in the northwestern region of Galilee, the town Nazareth. It's so small that the Gospels are actually the only ancient written record that existed. She's engaged to be married, so she's probably in her late teens, according to the custom of the day. All of these descriptors point to the idea that she isn't someone to pay all that much attention to, at least by cultural standards. Except that an angel shows up to her and calls her favored and calls her blessed. These are the words for the beginning in Mary's story, at least as counts it. A messenger from God shows up and says, blessed to her, like it's her name, like it's a guiding intention with a linguistic shift that lets the word transform everything. And yes, maybe I'm getting a little too confident with that because the angel seemed to talk about what's going to happen in and to Mary's body with a little too much comfort, maybe a little too much certainty, if he wanted to avoid any kind of #MeToo in the Bible moment. But that word for the beginning, blessed, it did its work quickly. Mary claimed it and then lived into it. And even if the angel hadn't stopped to think about the importance of gaining clear and enthusiastic consent, Mary took the opportunity to manufacture it without a doubt. Oh, so blessing to all the earth will come on account of this young, female, uneducated, rural, devalued, vulnerable, precarious body. Bring it on. Let it be with me as you have said. Your name might not be your word for the beginning, or it might be. It might be your guiding intention. Maybe you'll hold on to the words that Mary was given and held on to. Blessed, with the knowledge that you receive blessing so that you can be a blessing. I don't think my parents knew what all my names meant when they gave them to me. They definitely didn't know the strange twist they would take when I got married. But my mom was always very intentional about telling us something, my brother and me. It had two parts to it. The first part was that we were accidents, both of us. She had never intended to have and raise children. I guess birth control in the 1970s wasn't magic. But we totally changed the trajectory of her life. Undeniably. The same is true for my dad as well, but my mom's more dramatically. So we knew that we were accidents, part one. But we also knew that this would follow that part every time, part two. And you're the best accidents that ever happened to me. Words for our beginnings. And I don't think that they were always true, or rather that she always felt them to be true. I mean, how could she? We spent years as teenagers, and not the kind of cool teenagers like we have running. Are you teen? You're teen, yeah? Yeah, not the kind of cool teenagers that we have running tech here. We were the kind of teenagers who insisted that we knew everything when we hardly knew anything at all. But the word for our beginning was always the same, the best accidents that ever happened to me, which gave us a chance to live into something better than what we were. Traditionally, the season of Advent has offered 4 words, a series of 4 words, one each week. And we've kind of embraced this word's opening, this week's word. The word for the first week of Advent traditionally is hope. I wonder what it feels like to claim that and to wear that this year. I am deeply aware that our movement through each day of this season puts us a day closer to a political transition that, to a person in this room, I know, we're not looking forward to. Dread might not be too strong of a word. I'm sure that every single person and every single one of us could rattle off a whole litany of things that we fear will come to pass, and of things that we are grieving already, the all but certain loss of. We just know it's going to be bad. Lives that are already precarious will become more so. People who already live under threat will continue to do so. A planet already racked with fever is not going to see that fever break. Maybe it will help us to remember that the first Christmas story played out in a world where Caesar was already emperor and where Pilate's petty tyranny already shaped political and social life in Nazareth and beyond. So what would it be like to claim hope as our word for the beginning of Advent, for the beginning of the new year, for the beginning of the next administration? Understanding hope is probably a good thing to do before we do that. I like what the activist Mariam Kaba has said about it. She wrote, "Hope doesn't preclude feeling sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion that makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion, you know? Hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline. We have to practice it every single day." And the poet Grace Paley adds about hope. She says the only recognizable feature of is action. As we prepare ourselves to lean into a reality that is different from the one we want, and let's be honest, would have been different from the one we wanted, even if the electoral result had been different, let us claim this as a blessing, as a word for this beginning, as a guiding intention, as a name, hope, for the world that we want to inhabit. Let us think it, let us dream it, let us act it into being. Because this is what has always been true. True of the ancient world, true of the world that Jesus was born into, and true of today. That people with power will seek to increase that power at the expense of everybody else, and that the Spirit is always seeking to give birth to new possibilities that invite the flourishing of all. So today, I embody hope. And today, hope is your name. And this is God's good news. Amen.